Alright everyone, hopefully you guys are all excited for 6.0, especially after the live stream where there are going to be potential many interesting quality of life updates into the game. Whether or not, we all agree upon the decision that whole universe made, well, at the end of the day, there has been some decent, great potential update that's coming into the game, especially with the fact that the new Universal Stellar Fortuna system, where you can get up to 4 Constellations for free per year, is an interesting topic. So yes, a ton of you probably are staring at all the 5-star that you've got on the account and thinking, which one do I pick? Because it is a rather important decision. Constellations are great, especially on the 5 stars, which is definitely going to be the whole point of today's videos, to help you guys make the best decision overall. Loma and Flint, as well as so many other amazing Not Cry character, is coming pretty soon, and I know that many of you are trying to get them. So if you're planning to swipe for pooling, then don't forget to check out Loot Bar. If you know me, I've been recommending you guys Loot Bar before, since you can always save almost a 25% on all of your top-ups. With over 100,000 orders and so many good reviews at this point. And by the way, this also applies to PS5 and Xbox user who can place orders through Loot Bar. You can be sure that Loot Bar is trustworthy. Here you can see my order receipts of all of my top-ups that I have done. And for those who are going for the highest package when topping up, there's also a limited discount options available once every version. So guys, be sure to check out Loot Bar through the link in my description, as it can be a great way for you to save your money, especially if you are topping up a large amount. So how the video will go is, first I'll be talking about support character and sub DPS potential character that is worth it for you guys to take into consideration for the constellation. As of course, usually support and sub DPS character constellation value are going to be the highest, and their meta longevity is always going to be higher than the DPS character. After that, we're going to be touching on the constellation of the DPS character that are still worth it when we are considering for the meta. And then finally, it's going to be the character that are basically preference, not technically recommended for the meta, but they are still good if you are into them. And there are also only a limited number of characters being available on the list currently, and you must have them already on your account first before you can get their constellations. So with that out of the way, let us just dive right in. Alright, remember our lovely Nilou? Yes, as I mentioned, we're going to be starting off with more or less sub DPS, a supportive character. Now, technically speaking, we can sometimes consider Nilou to be a DPS character as well, depending on which kind of investment we have. But generally, she is a support character on the account, and currently, from what I'm seeing, she's probably the character that has the most value on the free banner right now. Because of course, Llama is going to be coming soon alongside with, Nilou being on the Chronicle banners as well. So especially if you are someone who's looking to get your Bloom team a lot better, Nilou's undoubtedly going to be the best character to come. So looking into her constellation wise, generally speaking, her C1 is kind of okay. It's not that important, but what C1 actually do is that it leads you to a freaking insane of a C2. This is undoubtedly still up until this point one of the best C2s that we have in the game, especially when we are using it in the right situation, of course, because the amount of hydro and dendro resistance that C2 Nilou just basically give, pair that up into a Llama Bloom team, and holy freaking damn, I don't think you're gonna be having any kind of trouble with Genshin Impact content until the rest of the game, apart from when it comes to Will's content, of course, but generally it is that good. Up next we have Shenhe. In the past, Shenhe took a very long time before she actually came back, but now just I think only around 2 patches later, she also is available on the Chronicle banner again. And other than that, usually Shenhe value has dropped quite a bit, but the fact that Skirk Escoffier is available in the game right now, and especially, after Not Cry, most likely Snatch are going to come, Cryo is slowly creeping back. Therefore, Shenhe being one of the best Cryo buffer in the entire game, she still definitely has a value. So yes, whenever we are looking into a constellation, I value my Shenhe a lot. That's why I have her at a C3 level. Both of her C1 and C2 brings you a lot of quality of life increase to Shenhe. As I always say, Shenhe is an okay character at the C0 level, but when you touch on C1, it resolves a lot of her energy issues, which she does have, especially when you are using her on her signature and you are probably going to be lacking quite a bit of energy regen. And more than that, E-skill cast does result in you potentially increasing your team damage as well, because you're again providing your team more quills. C2 is also really good because now her elemental burst is extended really significantly. It is basically a long time of 18 seconds, and other than that you get cryo crit damage increase. So yeah, very valuable of a constellation. Generally I think it's a great stopping point for most of our constellation right there. If you do have C3, that's great. Your team damage is technically going to be increased, that's why I have a C3, but it's not a recommendation, and you can stop at the C2 level. Baiju is also on the banner. His value is still really high when it comes to Dendro applications, healing capability for the team, and yes, he's still one of the only 5-star healer Dendro wise that we have access to in the game, unless you do have access to a C1 Lauma. Usually we're not gonna probably think too much about Baiju's constellation. However, if you do have Baiju on your account and you know you have a free constellation to spend on, you don't know where to do it, Baiju constellation for a good supportive character that he is generally fine. Now C1 is okay, it does offer a bit of minor utility, but it's not prioritized. However, it does lead you closer to a C2, where this could be vastly improving your team sustain as well as damage to Bloom or aggravates team comps wherever you are using him in. So if you're considering this, it is not too bad. Now Kokomi, similar situation with Baiju, where yes, she's still going to be having a lot of value, especially when Hyper Bloom and Bloom teams are generally coming back, with Lauma being available once again. Usually Kokomi constellation isn't too much of a needed. However, if you're considering some of the better constellation that Kokomi has, so C1 is generally going to be pretty nice, where it adds a swimming fish to your hydro attack in burst combos. Therefore it does help her to increase damage as well as reaction utility for Bloom team especially. And yes, Kokomi herself does have the capability to do pretty decent damage if you invest into her, but then other than that, it's not really too much of a needed for her constellation, at least up until a C4, where improved energy regen as well as her normal attack speed, which is generally pretty nice overall, but it is not until a C4, which I don't think you guys are going to be getting anytime soon. Moving on, we do have a Mona. Now yes, even though some of the character I'll probably be discussing are still going to be standard wise character, however they do still have value. It's not like if they're standard character they don't have value in any way, especially when generally speaking Mona C1 is going to be kind of improved. Now it's not available as of the moment I release this video, but as you can see, Lunar Charge is already having the damage increase, so whenever Lauma comes, Lunar Bloom is going to having a slight bit of 15% damage increase as well from what we're suspecting. Now, is it going to be worth it for you to actually try and invest into a C1 Mona if you haven't already have her C1? Well, I don't think it's too much of it worth it if you are forcing yourself, because generally speaking, it's actually not too much of a difference, even though it does help with a bit of increase. But it does make a bit more valuable when it comes to consideration for the constellation itself. However, when it comes to Mona's constellation value-wise, it is not going to be until her C4 that, you know, it's generally going to be the most important constellation for Mona overall. However, should you actually aim for C4 Mona? Obviously, it's not too much of an importance, but it does get you closer to kind of like a C6 level. And then at that point, if you pass that, you're gonna get the free material for you to get your character to level 100. So yeah, if you don't have any other constellation to invest in, you can consider those. Jean still have her perks, and it's rather nice. We don't always use Jean nowadays, but what she does is still good when it comes to healings and all the things she does, especially when it comes to Sunfire synergy with some of the characters. Now, constellations, some of the first ones aren't really too good. Now, the C2 is generally going to be fine. I don't think it's that too much of an importance where you have attack speed increase, but it's going to be a fun build here and there. But the best overall constellation for Jean is going to be at a C4 level, and especially when you're going to be getting closer to a C6 Jean, and after that you have more free materials, then overall it is generally nice for you to consider, but only in the cases where you are using your Jean still and you are thinking about, especially in Sunfire Jean teams, it is actually a pretty good team, so you guys can consider that. Then there's Yae Miko. Up until this point, Yae Miko has never been considered to be too good of a character. However, if you still want to use Yae Miko, she is still decent. She can do damage, especially when you have more for Constellations, of course. But well, do you know that even when she have Constellation, she is going to be starting to fall a little bit behind compared to some of the newer supportive sub DPS character that is, released later on in the game. However, if you do have them, it is nice. She do damage, and I'm still using Yae Miko because I really like her up until this point, which is why I've already invested into a C4 Yae Miko before. Now, most of you probably don't have a Constellation Yae Miko. Generally speaking, C1 Yae Miko is okay. Well, yeah, it does help her a bit with her elemental burst. However, I don't think it's too much of a difference from what I've already been using my C4 Yae Miko for a long time. But more importantly, it gets you closer to a C2, and C2 is really good, one of the best constellation for her, because not only your E skill level is increased to a level 4, but the attack range is increased by 60% range, and that is really good. Best quality of life, especially when you are in the overworld. So she still has some good constellation for us to consider when we are investing into her. Other than that, we have Dia, probably a more underrated standard banner pick. Dia is more of a niche character, obviously. However, she has a decent defensive utility, especially when it comes to pyro applications as well. I think she's quite nice at it, but she's still really nice in, burning reaction team with Knight. Some version team she can be on, and obviously if you want to build her as a DPS character, have more constellation into Dia, especially when it comes all the way to C6. I think she's going to be a fine character if you are into Dia herself. Now, overall, I think Dia's C1 and C2 has great value, where C1 boosts her max HP by 20%, therefore more damage and survivability, and C2 actually increases her Fiery Sanctum by 6 seconds, as well as improving the coordinated attack damage by 50%. So overall, the constellation values, I think many of the constellation on Dia has nice value, because when it comes to the differences in her constellation providing her damage, it is rather good. So the more constellation you have onto her, if you like Dia, the better. But overall, her 2 constellation does help her with nice quality of life increase. So if you're considering Dia, those are something that you can aim for. And those were mainly the supportive sub DPS character. And now we're going to be touching on the DPS character that still has a nice ranking. And definitely one of the best characters out there is going to be Hu Tao. I think it's great that they added Hu Tao. I really like her. She's still one of the best pyro character if you do invest into her. It's not like, if we have Alekina with Mavuika, Hu Tao can't do damage. Still like Hu Tao, she can dish out pretty interesting damage. While her constellation has never been the best thing about Hu Tao, because most of it doesn't really help her too much. Generally speaking, the best overall value constellation for Hu Tao has always been her C1, because Hu Tao focuses the most on her charge attack, unless you have a Xianjun plunging team comms with Hu Tao. But at that point, you can still do your charge attack and plunge at the same time, and I've been doing that for a long time. I love the playstyle. C1 just take the stamina gauge out of the fact that you're doing charge attack, so that's going to be increasing her DPS by quite a bit, and overall it's still one of the better C1 value out there that we have in the entire game. So yes, I haven't got a C1 Hu Tao. Probably I'm going to be investing into a C1 Hu Tao whenever I have the free constellation, hands down. Ganyu is still one of really nice character. I think it's interesting how, in the past, the Leeway big 3, which are Hu Tao, Ganyu, and Xiao, these 2 girls here are still holding up, and that's really good, especially when Cryo again is actually creeping back with Escoffier. So yes, honestly speaking, I'm probably going to be considering Ganyu's constellation for free as well, because her C1 is very strong. The rest of her constellation though isn't entirely too valuable, at least up until your C6 level Ganyu, which I don't think we're going to be having anytime soon, most of us. So C1 is generally the way to go for a consideration Ganyu. And yeah, she still has great value, she does damage, and that's a good thing about Ganyu. Other than that, our Ayaka came back with Escoffier Cave, which is really nice. I love Ayaka as a character. She is great, really easy to play around with. One of, the better cryo character, well, at least before Skirk came. Now Skirk is going to be the best cryo character, but maybe many of you don't have Skirk, you still have Ayaka. Now her constellation wise, her C1 is okay, not too much of an importance, but her C2 does give her a good quality of life increase, because now her elemental burst is less prone in missing, as that is one of the best damaging source that Ayaka has access to. So it might be hard for us to get a C2 Ayaka if we haven't already have a C1 Ayaka, but then if if you're investing into her, I think it's a fine thing to do. The most important constellation of Ayaka isn't until a C4 level, because at that point it's just really insanely good. But well, yeah, I don't think many of us are going to be having an Ayaka anytime soon, so that's not too much of a consideration, especially there's so many other characters that are coming soon. So those guys, I would say, are some of the more valuable DPS characters that you guys should be looking into if you are considering DPSs wise. Again, those are meta wise, but now we're going to be moving on to, you know, the rest of the casting character that is available for free constellations, where basically all of these characters is falling behind the beta if we are considering it. But if you are liking them, you want to play them as a character, they will still have a value, especially again, we are getting a free constellation for the character. I don't think it's too bad. So first off, it's going to be a Sino. Well, yeah, there is going to be Flint, who's another Electro DPS male character that is going to be coming soon. Now, if you want to invest into Sino, I think C1 and C2 constellation is rather nice. C1 does give him a bit of a normal attack speed increase, overall a bit of a DPS increase for him, but other than that, I think C2 is one of the best constellation that Sino has access to. It stacks up to basically a 50% electro damage bonus during his elemental burst, so yeah, a massive DPS increase for himself. Not too bad. Overall, Sino is a kind of fun character to play around with if you still like him, but he does, you know, have a bit of a trouble here and there. Since I already have a C1 Sino, maybe if I have a free constellation, I may consider having a C2. I don't know. I'll look into it whenever I have a chance. Then there's Wanderer. Again, he is a preference character. However, he has the capability to do good numbers. So especially when we are considering him for a constellation, both of his C1 and C2 are generally pretty good, where C1 increases attack speed while he's floating, especially when he's a character that already have a pretty decent attack speed. I feel that the more attack speed he has, it feels good playing him with faster attack speed. C2 buff his elemental burst damage for up to 200% depending on the remaining stamina that he has. So definitely going to be a major spike. Even though he's not a top tier meta character, I think I like Wanderer whenever I get a chance to play him. I didn't pull him before, but whenever I have a chance to play around with Wanderer, he's a nice character. He feels good playing him as a DPS where he floats around. I don't think many character has access to it apart from him and Chaska, so not too bad of a character himself. Ito, well, yes, as a Geo DPS character, he falls short compared to Navia, of course. You're probably one of the few characters that want to invest into Constellation, but if you guys do, then most importantly, C1 is going to be fine as it does add a faster burst stack. However, C2 is generally the more important constellation for him because it reduces his burst cooldown and it restores his energy based on Geo character in the party, therefore solving his high energy issues as well as having rather smooth rotations. For Xiao, it's still going to be considered that Xiao is more of a DPS powerhouse when compared to Hu Tao and Ganyu, but sometimes I use Xiao because especially when he already have it's technically best team with Furina and Xian Yun. I think his team buff has already been increased quite significantly and Xiao is rather capable at the current point if you are investing into him. But if you're looking into his constellation, apart from his C6 where it's going to be the most valuable, other constellation really does yield him quite minimal benefits, and obviously he has one of the worst constellation in the game. C1 is okay, you get more E-skill charges and I think that's fine. So at that point you get 3 E-skill charges. That's not too much of an importance, but if you want to, you can consider getting Xiao C1, that's totally fine. Ajato, well, he is a Hydro character, definitely falls short when it comes to DPS wise because we just have so many good Hydro characters at this point in time. I think sometimes it still has its value, especially when you're using him sometimes as the character that has off-field Hydro application whenever he is in his elemental burst. But overall, I think most of the time we're probably not going to be using him unless you like him as a character. I think Ayato is a really cool character. He has great design, by the way. Right, look at his design. I like him. And constellation wise, whenever you are considering him, C1 is okay. It looks good, but it is rather unreliable and it does depend on your enemy's health. So I mean, it's okay, but then it's like 50% of the time you're probably not going to be having the 40% damage increase. But the more important thing is going to be his C2, where it increases his maximum Namisen stack, so basically allowing for one more stack on at least 12 Shinjuken attack per skill, and also increases max HP by 50% as well. So generally quite a nice DPS increase wise, but generally that's for those of you who likes Ayato and is investing into him. Same for Child, a pretty situational character. If you still like him, well, yes, he's still going to be performing, but considering again so many good hydro characters nowadays, we haven't been using Child too much. However, if you like Child, you're investing into him, yes. C1, even though many don't consider it to be too important, but sometimes it does help you to have easier rotations. So it is a nice quality of life increase for Child whenever you are playing him, and especially when we do have a free constellation for you to drop onto your characters. I think it's a fine choice. But then the rest of the constellation, I think it's okay. It's not too important for Child, and you know, the higher constellation he has, the better he is. But I don't think many of us are going to be investing more into Child's constellation other than his C1 mostly. For Klee, I don't know if she's going to get a buff whenever Alice come. Hopefully Alice buff Klee. That would be insanely fun. But at the current point, she is still just a pyro DPS character that I don't think many of us are going to be using. However, the good thing about Klee is that if you do have a C2 Klee, she's one of the few characters in the game where she has access to the French Red, provided you do have a constellation for Klee. C1 is okay, it's not too important, but the more important thing is C2. I don't know, many of us are probably going to get C2 anytime, so it's going to be an investment into Klee if you are going down the route. Eula wise, I like her as a character. Unfortunately, physical attack character is still being forgotten. Hopefully Hoyoverse do something with physical character anytime soon. Oh my freaking god, I can't believe it. All the way ever since 1.5. Well, we do have Mika. It doesn't really change anything for Eula, unfortunately. That's the sad thing about her, but if you still like her, her constellation is, I think it's rather nice. C1 does grant her a 30% physical damage buff for her Grim Heart stack, so it is valuable if you are investing into it. Most important though is going to be her C2, where it decreases the cooldown of her hold skill. So it is quality of life increase, but her C1 and C2 is generally quite nice. But please, Hoyoverse, do something about physical characters so that we can enjoy Eula again. In the past, she is a fun character to play. She is technically kind of still fun now, but it is actually quite hard to use her in the meta wise. Diluc, yes, he's a pyro character. Most likely not going to be important for us to be investing too much constellation unless you like him. Diluc constellations does give him quite a bit of quality of life increase in damaging wise. However, the most important one is going to be his C6, as after casting element skill, the next 2 normal attack gains a 30% damage as well as attack speed. So yeah, if you have him up until C6, which I think many of us are probably going to be having him at some point, especially after that you get more free material for your level 100. So yeah, I don't think I recommend going for the constellation for standard character unless you really like them. Same for Kuching, right? I love Kuching as a character. I probably have more than her C6 at this point because sometimes I choose her from the free banners. Again, she is in similar situation. She does deal damage. One of her more important constellation is going to be her C4 if you are looking into the constellation investment. Tighnari, yes, I think he's still one of the better standard character up until this point as well. He has decent damage for a Dendro character. We're probably not going to be able to make use of him too much just yet with the introduction of Inefa and Lauma, as he's a character that works more in aggravate team. But if you do have his oh my god, wait, I have a C3 Tighnari. How did I get so many of his constellation? Okay, so his C1s does give him a charge attack crit rate increase. I think it's nice. It is actually not bad. Other than that, his C2 is kind of nice as well because a 20% dendro damage increase whenever your character is inside his field. So Tighnari has one of the better earlier constellation for you guys to be investing in, and generally as a dendro character, he isn't that bad of his character. I think it's fine. Obviously, you know, the more constellation he has, I think at this point I'll probably try to have a C4 Tighnari because it's kind of nice, but it depends on whether or not I'm still using Tighnari. That's the thing with the standard character most of the time. Other than that, we have Yoimiya, again, purely a preference character, right? She is fun to play, especially as a pyro DPS, but honestly, he really is a preference character. His C1's not too valuable, but if you do have it, it is okay. But what's more important is her C2, because it provides 25% the pyro damage bonus after she lands a critical hit, which I suppose you're probably going to be doing that mostly every time anyway. So yeah, that's a fine investment for those of you who are considering getting more constellation for Yoimiya. Other than that, there's also Albedo. I don't think you should be considering his constellation, as most of the time his constellation does not actually help him to have a notable improvement in any way. So I think you should just go ahead and save. And then finally we have Chi-Chi. I don't know why I'm talking about Chi-Chi. You guys are probably gonna want to steer clear of Chi-Chi Constellations. Yeah, right. Because you're probably going to be losing it to it sometimes anyway. So generally guys, those are going to be the overview of the character that I've been recommending to you guys about the Constellation. I hope that was helpful to you. But basically, just for a quick reminder, support and sub DPS character, you know, like Nilou, Shanha, Baizhu. Sometimes you're considering Mona and Kokomi. Those still have really decent Constellation investment as they are nice support sub DPS character. Some of the better DPS character are generally a C1 Hu Tao, C1 Ganyu, Ayaka, C2, C4 if you are investing into them. That still generally have the potential to be rather meta-wise if you are looking into the meta. And then yes, the rest of the remaining characters are going to be your preference-wise. And I think those are rather important as well, because at the end of the day, it's just a game for you guys to enjoy. Do decide on the character that you feel like you're going to be playing around with them the most. You spend the most time with them, just like how I spend the most of my time with my Kuching. Therefore, I always try to have her at the max constellation possible. That's just the way we play the game. So hopefully the video have been valuable to you. If you do have any question, leave it down in the comment section and I or some other lovely Genshin players will get to you there. If you're still on the fence of which character to go ahead and pull for in patch 6.0, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and check out my channel, as there are a lot of video I've been discussing and I'm sure it will be very valuable to you. With that, I wish you a super day and I'll catch you on my next video.